It starts with one clear demand that keeps echoing around this fan base. The Detroit Lions must get more pass rush help in 2026. Not just depth pieces, not just rotation guys, but legitimate impact players who can take pressure off Aiden Hutchinson and elevate this defense when it matters most. And with free agency only weeks away, the rumors are heating up in a serious way. The name that keeps surfacing over and over again is Joey Bosa. This isn't just a one-day rumor. Multiple articles have continued to connect Bosa to Detroit, and the fit makes sense when you really break it down. The idea isn't to bring him in as an every-down defensive end. No one is asking for that. The vision being floated is around 60% of snaps. Situational pass rusher, sub-package weapon. Someone who can still give you high-level production without carrying a full workload. Last season, the Lions had 16 sacks on third down, tied for 15th in the league. That's middle of the pack. For a team with championship aspirations, middle of the pack isn't good enough. The argument is that Bosa's speed-to-power ability, his effort level, and his knack for cleaning up late plays would pair extremely well opposite Hutchinson. You don't need him for 17 games at full capacity. If you can realistically get 13 solid games out of him and keep him fresh for the postseason, that might be enough. Because in the playoffs, it only takes one snap, one pressure, one strip sack, one moment. Of course, injuries are part of the discussion. Bosa has dealt with them, but the counter-argument is simple. You're not building the entire pass rush around him. You'd still rotate bodies, possibly add another veteran like Alquadon Muhammad, and draft another edge. Stack the room wave after wave. That's how you survive a long season and peak at the right time. Now let's shift to the offensive line rumors, because those are swirling too. There's talk about newly released linemen, including James Daniels. He signed a 3-year deal previously and is only 28, but the concern that keeps popping up is durability. And here's where it gets serious. You cannot afford injury-prone offensive linemen when you're protecting a franchise quarterback and trying to dominate in the trenches. That tackle position, whether it's left or right, depending on how they align things, has to be handled decisively. No half measures. No patchwork solutions. There's speculation the Lions could go tackle early in the draft, and honestly, that makes logical sense. If you want long-term stability, you invest premium capital there. Free agency can supplement, but the draft builds foundations. Then there's the dream scenario many fans would love, but admit probably won't happen. Tyler Linderbaum. If the Lions somehow landed Linderbaum, that would immediately stabilize the interior. It would solve a lot, but competition would be fierce. Teams like the Ravens could simply retain him, and other center-needy teams would absolutely jump into the mix. It's the kind of move that excites a fan base, but the realism factor tempers expectations. On the defensive side, the bold trade fantasy continues. Max Crosby. Imagine pairing Crosby with Hutchinson. It's the kind of move that shifts the power balance in the NFC, but there are hurdles. Other teams, particularly ones loaded with draft capital, would be aggressive. The belief circulating is that Detroit would try, but might ultimately fall short if a team with more ammunition pushes Ullin. It's the type of sweepstakes that tests how aggressive the front office truly wants to be. Extensions are also being debated. Sam Laporta and Brian Branch are key young pillars. The thinking is Laporta could see an extension during the season, possibly around October, especially if he proves he's fully back from injury. Branch's situation is more complicated because of his recovery timeline. You don't rush into paying a player until you're confident he's fully returned to form. Timing matters. Structure matters. There's also conversation around restructuring Alan McNeil's contract that's risky if you're unsure about how he'll bounce back physically. Restructuring pushes money into the future, and if performance declines, it becomes a burden. The Lions have been financially disciplined. Their dead cap isn't out of control. That's not accidental. It reflects strong contract management. The franchise tag debate is another hot topic. Some see it as a tool, others see it as a sign that negotiations failed. The Lions have prided themselves on handling business proactively. Using the tag can sometimes feel like a last resort. And then there's the wildest idea floating around. Trading Amon-Ra St. Brown for Chris Jones. That proposal has sparked intense reactions. The pushback is immediate and emotional. St. Brown isn't just production. He represents culture, grit, preparation, leadership. He practices hard. He plays through pain. He embodies the identity shift this organization has built. Moving him for an older defensive tackle would send shockwaves through the locker room. For many, that's a non-starter. Finally, the situation around Alex Anzalone continues to generate noise. Reports of him feeling slighted over team media and then publicly trying to smooth things over have rubbed some fans the wrong way. There's a growing belief he may not be back, not necessarily because the Lions don't value him, but because another team, possibly one looking to aggressively improve, could outbid Detroit. So here we are. Pass rush urgency, offensive line caution, dream signings, trade fantasies, extension timing, financial discipline, cultural cornerstones. This offseason feels like it could define the next phase of this roster. If you had to choose one aggressive move that actually becomes reality, is it Joey Bosa in a rotational role, a serious push for Max Crosby, or standing firm and building through the draft? What direction would you take and why? Because this is where the conversation really gets serious. It's easy to throw names around. It's easy to say go get Bosa or trade for Crosby, but when you zoom out and look at what this front office has actually done over the past few years, you start to see a pattern. They don't panic. They don't overspend just to win headlines. They build in layers. If you look at the Joey Bosa scenario again, the appeal isn't just talent, it's structure. A reduced snap count, heavy third down usage, playoff freshness. That's strategic. That's controlled aggression. You're not asking him to be 2017 Joey Bosa. You're asking him to win critical downs in January. And if he gives you 8 to 10 meaningful sacks in limited usage and forces offenses to slide protection away from Aiden Hutchinson, that changes how this defense operates. But here's the deeper layer. If Detroit adds a situational pass rusher and drafts another edge early, suddenly the entire defensive rotation becomes more dangerous. Now quarterbacks can't key in on one guy. Now your interior linemen benefit. Now coverage improves because pressure arrives quicker. Pass rush isn't isolated, it's contagious. That's why the Max Crosby dream is so explosive. He's not rotational, he's relentless. He plays with an edge that mirrors what this coaching staff preaches. Pairing Crosby and Hutchinson would create one of the most feared duos in football overnight, but the cost would be enormous. Draft capital, possibly future flexibility, and you have to ask, does this front office believe in building sustained contention or pushing chips in for a short window? And that brings us back to identity. Trading Amon-Ra St. Brown for Chris Jones would technically address the defensive interior. Yes, Chris Jones is dominant. Yes, he disrupts games. But when you trade a foundational culture piece like St. Brown, you're not just moving a receiver, you're removing tone-setting behavior from practice fields, locker rooms, film sessions. He represents work ethic. He represents internal accountability. That's not easily replaced. Culture isn't something you gamble with lightly, and this regime has invested heavily in creating one. The Alex Anzalone situation is different. That feels like timing. Sometimes, relationships just run their course. If another team overpays, Detroit may simply tip its cap and move forward. That's business. But even there, you see the philosophy. Don't chase emotional decisions. Don't overspend to silence noise. Let the market dictate. Financially, the Lions are in strong shape. The dead cap isn't crippling. Contracts are structured smartly. There's flexibility without recklessness. That's why the franchise tag conversation feels almost unnecessary. This team has shown it can negotiate extensions before things get messy. They're not scrambling. And when you think about Sam Laporta and Brian Branch, the extension timing debate makes sense. Pay players when you're confident in trajectory and health. Not before, not out of fear. Pay based on projection plus proof. Now here's what really matters. This offseason isn't about making the flashiest move. It's about maximizing the championship window without destabilizing the foundation. The Lions are no longer rebuilding, they're refining. That's a completely different pressure. Do you trust internal development plus a strategic veteran addition like Bosa? Do you go bold and chase a blockbuster like Crosby? Do you prioritize trench stability in the draft and let the roster evolve naturally? Every path has risk. Every path has reward. But the biggest question might be this. Do you believe this front office should make one headline-grabbing move to push this team over the top? Or do you trust the steady blueprint that got them here? And the reason this conversation refuses to cool down is because expectations have officially changed. A few years ago, we were talking about patience, growth, draft positioning. Now we're talking about finishing. That's a completely different mental space for a franchise and for a fan base. When you reach this stage, every marginal upgrade matters. One extra pressure in the fourth quarter, one extra block sealed on the edge, one fewer blown coverage because the quarterback didn't have time to scan the field. That's the level Detroit is operating at now. Think about the third down sack number again. 16, tied for 15th. That's average. And average doesn't win you playoff games against elite quarterbacks. In January, you're facing offenses that don't beat themselves. You have to take something from them. That's where a situational pass rusher becomes more than just depth. It becomes leverage. Now flip it to the offensive side. The hesitation around bringing in an injury-prone lineman isn't negativity. It's discipline. You don't compromise protection, continuity. Offensive line chemistry is fragile. One weak link, one player who can't stay healthy, and suddenly your entire protection plan changes weekly. That's not sustainable for a team with high expectations. Drafting a tackle early would signal long-term vision. It would say, we're thinking about 2026 and 2027 just as much as 2025. That's how dynasties are built, through uncomfortable patience, even when you're close. But fans don't live in patience. Fans live in momentum. That's why the Crosby dream is so intoxicating. It's immediate impact. It's jersey sales. It's national attention. It's fear in opposing offensive coordinators. But it also comes with draft pick sacrifice. And here's the part no one talks about enough. Draft picks are cheap starters. They're controlled contracts. They're roster balance. Lose too many, and you start paying premiums everywhere else. This front office has been methodical. They've avoided emotional overreactions. They haven't chased every shiny object. And because of that, the cap is stable. The locker room culture is intact. The team identity is clear. That identity revolves around physicality, accountability, and internal development. When you talk about extending young core players during the season rather than rushing deals in March, that's a reflection of confidence. Confidence that the structure works. Confidence that the timeline is under control. Even the Anzalone situation, as noisy as it feels, fits into a broader philosophy. If a veteran's market exceeds your internal valuation, you move forward. No grudges, no panic. That's how disciplined contenders operate. So the real tension this offseason isn't just about names, it's about philosophy versus urgency. Do you accelerate aggressively because the window feels open? Or do you trust that the window isn't closing anytime soon because your foundation is young and sustainable? The Lions aren't chasing relevance anymore, they have it. They're chasing execution at the highest level. And that's why every rumor feels amplified. Every potential signing feels like a turning point. Because now, the margin between a deep playoff run and a Super Bowl appearance might be one calculated move. If you were sitting in that front office chair right now, knowing the roster, knowing the cap, knowing the locker room, would you swing big for an impact defender, or would you trust depth, development, and draft capital to carry this team forward? And here's another layer that deserves attention. Timing. Free agency creates emotion. Draft season creates projection. But roster building is about sequencing. If Detroit strikes early in free agency with a controlled addition like a rotational edge, that could completely change how they approach the draft board. Suddenly, you're not drafting out of desperation, you're drafting out of strength. That's when teams make smarter selections. That's when value falls to you instead of you reaching for need. And let's be honest, reaching is how mistakes happen. The Lions are no longer in a position where they have to gamble to become competitive. They're competitive already. That means every move now has to be evaluated through one lens. Does this increase our probability of winning in January without damaging February and March of the following year? That's the maturity stage of a roster. If you look at the defensive front as currently constructed, the biggest vulnerability showed up in moments where they needed a single dominant snap. Not sustained effort, not energy, but one snap where the quarterback had no escape. That's why the conversation keeps circling back to pass rush. It's not about volume, it's about impact timing. And impact timing is expensive. But here's what makes this offseason fascinating. Detroit doesn't need 5 new starters.